In the NBA, there are guys who come into play and others who come in to annoy. Andres Nocioni was one of the latter. He didn't look to shine, he looked to disrupt. From day one, he played with an intensity that seemed out of place. In a locker room full of measured gestures, he sweated rage, energy, and a kind of hunger that hadn't been seen in the league for years. When he arrived in Chicago in 2004, no one really knew what to expect. He had a hard-to-pronounce name, a strange accent, and a way of playing that didn't fit any mold. He crashed, yelled, dove headfirst for a loose ball as if the game were a matter of life and death, and in a league built on glamour and control, that threw everyone off. Some admired him, others couldn't stand him. They called him dirty, over the top, unbearable. But Nocioni wasn't acting. He simply didn't know any other way to compete. His way of understanding basketball was more visceral, more emotional, more human, and in an NBA used to political correctness, that was almost a provocation. It didn't take him long to realize that something about his presence was unsettling, even before he opened his mouth, as if he had arrived with a story that followed him. Something from before, from another place, a wound the NBA hadn't yet healed, and that he unknowingly was about to reopen. In the early 2000s, the United States still believed it was invincible in basketball. It was a certainty, almost a religion. They had their NBA stars, their marketing, their power. The rest of the world watched from below, hoping that one day they'd be allowed to win out of politeness. But in 2002, something changed. In Indianapolis, in front of their own crowd, a group of Argentinians knocked them off that pedestal. It wasn't an accident. It was a generation that had been building something great. Manu Ginobili, Luis Scola, Fabrizio Oberto, Pepe Sanchez, Hugo Sconocini, and Nocioni. A group that played with the passion of a cause, not the comfort of privilege. When they beat the United States at the World Championship, they didn't just break a streak, they broke an idea. The idea that basketball could only be played one way. For the Americans, that game was a nightmare. They couldn't understand how a team with no big contracts, no signature shoes, no ad campaigns could run them over. For Argentina, it was historic. For them, it was a national humiliation, and that stayed with them. Every one of those Argentine players remained in the memory of American basketball as a reminder that arrogance can lose too. 2 years later, at the 2004 Athens Olympics, the story repeated itself. Argentina once again defeated Team USA, this time in the semifinals on their way to the gold medal. And if in 2002 it had been a surprise, in 2004 it was a statement. It was no longer luck, it was a different school of basketball, more selfless, more collective, more human. Nocioni wasn't the brightest star on that team, but he was the loudest soul. He jumped, shouted, pushed, complained. He played with the energy of someone who didn't know the word friendly. His intensity was contagious but also provocative. And when that tournament ended, many in the US remembered him for one simple reason. He was the guy who had faced them without fear, who had looked them in the eye without lowering his head. So when he crossed the ocean to the NBA, they weren't waiting with flowers, they were waiting with a mental list of personal fouls. They didn't hate him for what he had done, they hated him for having proved they could be beaten. Chicago was in rebuilding mode. These were the post-Jordan years, the biggest void a franchise could feel. The team was searching for an identity, something to lift it out of mediocrity. And suddenly, this 25-year-old Argentine showed up playing like he'd just come back from a war. Andres Nocioni. Messy hair, tense gaze, zero filter. From the very first practice, it was clear he wasn't a typical player. He wasn't impressed by the lights, the cameras, or the big names. He came to practice as if every play were a fight for survival. Scott Skiles, the coach, loved him and hated him at the same time. He saw in him an intensity the team desperately needed, but also a fury that was hard to control. In the NBA, the line between commitment and madness is very thin, and Nocioni crossed it every single day. Opponents felt it immediately. He crashed into everyone, not to provoke, but by instinct. He was one of those players who, if you lost focus for a second, would eat you alive. He hit the big guys, talked to the refs, earned technical fouls, and then apologized with an ironic smile. In Chicago, they started seeing him as a rarity, the guy who never gave up, whether winning or losing. Every possession, he played like he was defending his home. The crowd was divided. Some loved him for his intensity. Others didn't understand what that scrappy foreigner was doing in a league that was becoming more stylish, more polished. But the truth is, Chapu brought something Chicago desperately needed: blood. And even if his way of playing felt out of place, that was exactly what made him unforgettable. Over time, the same intensity that made him indispensable also made him a target. No one wants to play against a guy who never gets tired, never gives up, and isn't afraid to get dirty, but he didn't know how to do it any other way. He didn't come to fit in, he came to survive. And in the NBA, surviving with character sometimes comes at a high cost. In the NBA, when a player doesn't fit the mold, the system gives him a label. Some are troublemakers, others are hard to manage. Nocioni was called a dirty player. And the strange thing is, he never needed to actually hit anyone to earn that label. His way of looking, of colliding, of not backing down an inch was enough. In a league becoming more diplomatic, his presence felt like a personal provocation. Every time he defended, it looked like he was fighting a battle. He wouldn't let the opponent breathe. He chased them, talked to them, nudged them. It was an art that came from FIBA basketball. Defense as psychological warfare, not just physical, but in the US, that wasn't understood. In the NBA, where spectacle sells better than sacrifice, Nocioni looked like an intruder in a light show. His reputation formed quickly. Refs called him for hard fouls, pointed him out, and opponents looked at him with suspicion. Kevin Garnett cursed him out. LeBron argued every play with him, and even Kobe looked at him with that mix of respect and irritation. He was the guy who turned every possession into a pride battle. And in the NBA, where many players live between the comfort of talent and the fear of contact, that made him unbearable. But the most interesting thing is that Nocioni didn't want to be hated. He was hated for existing that way, for not lowering his intensity when everyone else slowed down, for defending with the same energy in the first minute as in the 48th, for not asking permission to compete. In his mind, there was no alternative mode. Either you left your skin on the court or it wasn't worth being there. The media portrayed him as reckless, hard to contain, but inside the locker room, many knew the truth, that he was one of the few who actually cared about winning. Not about stats, not about the contract, about winning. And that made him uncomfortable even among his teammates because not everyone was willing to put their body on the line like he did. There's a line that separates the players who are liked from those who make people uncomfortable. The first ones smile for the cameras, the second ones leave scars. Nocioni was on the side of the scars, and even though that cost him being loved, it also made him unforgettable. In the NBA, form matters too. It's not enough to play well. You have to know how to play. There's an invisible code of conduct, a kind of etiquette. Don't raise your voice. Don't celebrate too much. Don't argue with the referees. Don't stare down your opponent after a foul. In that world where everything is calculated, Nocioni's energy was an anomaly. He didn't know that manual. He didn't need it. He came from a kind of basketball where contact is normal, where passion is shouted, and where a hard foul isn't aggression. It's a message. On the court, he spoke with his body, with his hands, with gestures. He didn't do it for show. He did it because he felt it. But in the United States, every time he raised his arms or yelled after a play, the interpretation was different. To them, it was out of control, disrespect, pure Latin exaggeration. That cultural contrast was brutal. Nocioni played with fire, and the NBA worked hard to be a place of measured gestures. His energy felt out of place, like he was in a different movie. And little by little, that started to isolate him. It wasn't about talent, because he had plenty of that. It was about language. He spoke in intensity. They spoke in marketing. In more than one interview, Nocioni himself admitted he didn't understand many of the attitudes inside the locker room. He couldn't stand the lack of commitment, seeing players hold back to avoid injury, picking and choosing when to compete. To him, that was inconceivable. If you're on the court, you play with your soul. That mindset put him at odds with everyone, with opponents, with referees, and sometimes even with his own teammates. The result was inevitable. He started to be perceived as the difficult guy, not because he caused fights, but because his way of being exposed everyone else. In an environment that rewards control, authenticity bothers people. Nocioni was too genuine, too passionate, too loud to go unnoticed. And the strange thing is, the same energy that had made him a symbol with the Argentine national team became a curse in the NBA. It was the fire that kept him alive, but also the one that slowly burned him. Over time, Americans started to understand him a little better. They didn't love him, but they respected him. They recognized him as the guy who played every game like it was a final, but the damage was already done. To most, Nocioni was the crazy Argentine, the one who didn't know how to stay quiet, the one who played with a kind of intensity that felt personal. In reality, it wasn't rage, it was pride. Pride in representing a kind of basketball that can't be taught in practice. And in that friction between passion and protocol, his legend was born. And so was his curse. There are players who annoy you in the regular season and ruin your night in the playoffs. Nocioni was one of that kind. When Chicago started to come back to life in the mid-2000s, his intensity stopped looking like an excess and started to feel like a necessity. It was 2005. The Bulls hadn't made the playoffs in 6 years since Jordan's retirement, and Scott Scales was searching for an identity. He found in Nocioni a guy who didn't ask for permission to make contact. If the opponent wanted a show, he offered friction. If they wanted calm, he brought the storm. He was the team's pressure valve, the player who could change the tone of the game without scoring a point. The first big display came in the 2006 playoffs against the Miami Heat of Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal. It was a mission impossible for Chicago, a young team, against the future champions. But in that series, Nocioni became the symbol symbol of resistance. He averaged 22 points and 9 rebounds in the first 2 games with a level of effort that threw everyone off. He defended Wade, bumped Shaq on help plays, and still had the energy to shoot threes. His intensity infected the team, and even though Chicago ended up losing 4-2, Chapu earned something more important than a win: respect. In a league quick to label, that series moved him from the dirty category to the tough one. Because the difference between the two isn't how you play, but when. If you hit people in the regular season, you're dirty. If you hit in the playoffs, you're a warrior. And in 2006, Nocioni became just that, the guy everyone hated to face and that his teammates needed to stay standing. The following season, 2006 to 2007, was his consolidation. Chicago swept the defending champion Miami Heat 4-0 in the first round in a kind of symbolic revenge. Nocioni had been a finalist in the three-point contest at the European All-Star Weekend years earlier, and even if he no longer had the media spotlight, he was still the physical soul of the team. In those playoffs, his presence was felt beyond the numbers. Every time he stepped on the court, the energy changed. He was the intensity thermometer. If Nocioni dove on the floor, everyone followed. His reputation in the locker room changed too. Henrik Gordon and Luol Deng knew they could count on him when the game got messy. He wasn't an ego player, he was a cause player. The kind who understands that a timely stop on defense is worth more than a highlight. The Chicago crowd, which breathes history and demands commitment, adopted him quickly. At the United Center, every hit he delivered echoed, and that's exactly what made him so annoying for others, not because he hit hard, but because he forced you to play at his rhythm. He dragged you into his territory, that brand of basketball with no glamour but plenty of soul. It was impossible to stay composed when a guy threw himself on you to recover a loose ball in the second quarter of a random game. In those years, between 2005 and 2007, Nocioni was one of the most recognizable faces of the post-Jordan Bulls. Not because of titles, but because of attitude. Opponents hated him, his team needed him, and the fans gave him standing ovations with a mix of pride and relief. They finally had someone again who played like the jersey meant something. And just like that, without trying, he became something only the most intense players ever managed to be. The guy no one wants to face, but everyone wants beside them when the game turns ugly. After 4 seasons in Chicago, Andres Nocioni had become a respected name. He had gone from being the annoying Argentine to a symbol of effort in a franchise that was in desperate need of character. But in February 2009, the hardest blow came, a trade that sent him to Sacramento in a deal that included Brad Miller heading to the Bulls. For Nocioni, it was an abrupt break. He was going from a city with history, high standards, and aspirations to a team that was drifting without direction. The Kings at that time were a shadow of what they had been in the early 2000s. Arco Arena, once one of the loudest stadiums in the NBA, was filled with empty seats. The team piled up losses, the locker room was a puzzle of young players and veterans with no real leadership, and the competitive culture had all but disappeared. In that environment, Nocioni's intensity felt like a foreign language. His style, fighting for every ball, crashing into every cut, living the game with clenched teeth, found no response. The Kings had nothing to defend. Every loss was just another routine, and every win felt like a fluke. Nocioni kept playing with the same energy, but the surroundings didn't respond. He was a gladiator in an empty coliseum. During the 2008 to 2009 season, he averaged 13 points and 6 rebounds in his first games with Sacramento. Solid numbers, but they fell into a void. No one was watching those games. No one was cheering for those rebounds. For a player who fed off real competition, it was suffocating. The passion that had once made him feared in Chicago now felt out of place. He was the guy going full speed in practice even when the team had lost 10 straight. In later interviews, Nocioni admitted that the change hit him hard, not because of the city or the franchise, but because of the feeling of uselessness. In Chicago, every point served a purpose. In Sacramento, it was just a stat. I didn't like losing, and I had to live through a lot of that, he would say later. His relationship with the coaches, first Kenny Nett, then Paul Westphal, never quite clicked. They asked him for calm, patience, adaptation, but he didn't know how to play halfway. When intensity is your identity, dialing it down is like shedding your skin. He tried, but the result was the worst of all. He stopped enjoying the game. In 2010, with the Kings deep into a rebuilding phase and trade rumors swirling, Nocioni was sent to Philadelphia as part of another deal. His time in Sacramento had lasted just over a season, but for him, it was a brutal reminder of what it means to be in the wrong place. He made it clear the problem wasn't his style, it was the context. The NBA was entering a new era, one focused on the three-point shot, spacing, and analytics. Nocioni belonged to a different mindset, one of contact, friction, and real emotion. And in that transition, many like him were left off the map. His time in Sacramento was exactly that, a battle with no spectators. A player who kept fighting for every ball as if the whole world were watching, when in reality no one was watching anymore. In the summer of 2010, Nocioni arrived in Philadelphia as part of a trade designed to clear salary cap space for the Kings. For him, it was another opportunity. At 31 years old, he still felt he had fuel in the tank and above all, one fixed idea to prove he could still be useful in the NBA. The 76ers, coached by Doug Collins, were a young team with promising players like Drew Holiday and Evan Turner and Andre Iguodala bearing the weight of being the star without a throne. From day one, Nocioni did what he always did: intensity, quiet leadership, and that work ethic coaches appreciate even if it doesn't show up in the box score. Collins valued that. He saw him as a role model for the younger players, a veteran who understood what it meant to fight for a possession. But the context didn't help. The franchise was caught between rebuilding and the desire to compete. And that limbo, once again, was a space Nocioni didn't know how to navigate. In the 2010-11 season, he played 54 games and averaged 6 points and 3 rebounds in about 18 minutes per game. Not flashy numbers, but his contribution went beyond stats: defensive communication, physical presence, emotional energy. Philadelphia made the playoffs, where they ran into the Miami Heat's brand new Big Three: LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. The Sixers were eliminated 4-1, and although the series didn't leave much to remember, there was something symbolic. Nocioni, the same guy who had clashed with LeBron years earlier in Chicago, was still there defending with the same relentless drive. But the NBA doesn't forgive the passage of time, especially when your game depends on your body. The next season, 2011-12, was shortened by the lockout and even tougher for him. Collins began reducing his role, prioritizing younger players. In many games, he didn't even step on the court. His contract, which had once been a reward for his effort, was now a burden for the franchise. And what hurt the most wasn't the lack of minutes, but the silence. There was no public conflict, no dramatic statements, no scandal. They simply phased him out. In a league that loves spectacular farewells, Nocioni left without applause or spotlight. His last NBA game was on March 21st, 2012 against the New York Knicks. No one knew it, not even him. He played 3 minutes, grabbed 1 rebound, committed a foul, and went back to the bench. That's how the NBA career of one of the league's most intense competitors came to an end. Weeks later, the Sixers waived him. No press conference, no tribute, no headlines. It was the coldest possible ending for such a fiery player. In later interviews, Nocioni admitted he felt empty, but not frustrated. I gave everything I had. I didn't hold back. If I'm not in the NBA anymore, it's because they don't need me, not because I stopped fighting. And that phrase sums up his entire story. Nocioni didn't lose talent, he lost context. His way of playing, physical, emotional, intense, no longer fit in a league that was starting to look more at the three-pointer than the sweat. He left the NBA without making a sound, but without ever changing who he was. He didn't adapt, and maybe that's why, even if the system left him behind, the people who saw him play still remember him, because in a league full of protected stars, he was the guy who didn't know how to protect anything. Not his body, not his reputation, not even his career, just his way of being. When Nocioni left the NBA in 2012, many believed his story was coming to an end. In reality, what followed was his redemption. In the United States, he had been labeled a difficult player, too physical, too emotional, but in Europe, that intensity wasn't a problem. It was a virtue. Within just a few months, he felt part of something again. He returned to Laboro Kucha Baskonia, the club where he had shined before making the leap to the NBA. And it didn't take long for everything to click again. In the EuroLeague, his energy didn't feel out of place. It was celebrated. The fans recognized him, opponents respected him, and his teammates sought him out to feed off his fire. He was once again El Chapu, unfiltered, unapologetic, with that blend of instinct and courage that had made him different from the very beginning. In 2014, he signed with Real Madrid, and that's where the narrative took an unexpected turn. In an era where basketball was becoming more predictable, Nocioni offered something no system could manufacture: emotion. He wasn't a sharpshooter or a pick-and-roll artist, but he changed the temperature of games. If Madrid needed someone to disrupt the comfort, he did it. If a possession had to get messy, he was there. He was the kind of player who might not show up in the box score, but who transformed a team's rhythm. And that energy found its reward in the 2014 to 2015 season, the most glorious in modern Real Madrid history. That year, the team won absolutely everything: the Supercopa, Copa del Rey, ACB League, and EuroLeague, with Nocioni named Final Four MVP after a ferocious performance in the semifinal against Fenerbahce and the final against Olympiacos. In the NBA, they had told him his style was outdated in Europe, that same style took him to the top of the continent. It became known as the perfect season. What's interesting is that basketball, without realizing it, had started needing players like him again. While the NBA became obsessed with three-pointers and analytics, Europe was rediscovering the value of grit, of emotional connection, of players who gave their all even if they didn't fit the mold. His style, that controlled chaos that once seemed like a flaw, became a symbol of identity. In Madrid, they understood it right away. He wasn't a shooter, he wasn't a scorer, he was the guy who lit the spark. In 2016, he said goodbye to the Argentine national team at the Rio Olympic Games at 36 years old. It wasn't just any farewell, it was a standing ovation from an entire continent. The crowd, even the opposing team, stood to honor him. Labels and old prejudices no longer mattered. What remained was the certainty that on every court he stepped onto, Nocioni had left something that doesn't appear in the stats: authenticity. And perhaps that is his greatest victory. He didn't need to change to be respected, he just had to hold on until basketball remembered why it's worth feeling something. As the years went by, Andres Nocioni stopped being a controversial figure and became something harder to define. He was never a superstar, nor was he a fringe player. He was a living reminder of what basketball can be when it's played with the body, not just the head. His career was a constant collision between two worlds: efficiency and emotion, calculation and sacrifice, aesthetics and grit. In Argentina, his name is etched alongside Ginóbili, Scola, Oberto, and Pepe Sanchez as part of the Generación Dorada, the golden generation that forever changed how the world viewed Latin American basketball. But within that group, Nocioni had a different role. He wasn't the most talented nor the most marketable. He was the one who kept the fire burning, the one who dove headfirst when everyone else was tired, the one who refused to accept defeat even when the scoreboard said otherwise. In the NBA, his impact left scars more than stats. He played 514 games, averaged 10 points and 4 rebounds, but what people truly remember can't be measured in numbers. They remember the intensity, the discomfort, the way he forced everyone to look in the mirror and ask themselves if they were really giving everything. That's why, even though he was labeled dirty for years, many eventually understood. It wasn't violence, it was conviction. Today, when his name comes up, those who faced him describe him with the same word: competitor. A word that's rarely used in a league obsessed with highlights, but that defines those who leave a mark. His legacy isn't in trophies or records, it's in having proven that there's still room for those who feel too much, for those who can't dial it down, for those who believe that games are also won with the soul. Maybe that's why his legacy ages so well. In a time where everything is measured, compared, and optimized, Nocioni represents something almost lost. The player who doesn't seek approval, only purpose. A guy who, even when he was hated, reminded you why sports exist in the first place: to feel something real. And maybe that's his true legacy, that in a game full of stars, sometimes the most authentic one is the guy who never wanted to shine. In the end, Nocioni's story isn't just about a player, it's about a way of being in the world, about someone who approached every game with the same intensity others reserved for war, who played as if effort wasn't a choice but a moral obligation. They hated him for that, they admired him for that, and over time, when the lights went out, many realized that what made people uncomfortable wasn't his style, but what it exposed, that sometimes you have to make others uncomfortable to be true. And maybe the question that still lingers is simple but uncomfortable, just like him. How many players like that are left today, willing to give their body when everyone else would rather protect their brand? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.